My name is Sarah Mason, and I've dedicated my life to leading others in worship. I've always believed worship was my calling, my purpose, a way to connect hearts to God. For the past 20 years, I've served as a worship leader in the small but vibrant community of Greenville, where music and ministry intertwine. Every Sunday morning, I'd step onto the stage, my guitar slung across my shoulder, ready to lift my voice in praise alongside our congregation. But I could have never imagined how my understanding of worship was about to change forever. It was a frosty morning in February, the kind where winter clung stubbornly to the air. I was running late for our 6 a.m. prayer meeting, my usual morning routine disrupted by an unexpected overnight snowstorm. As I scraped ice from my windshield, my breath formed clouds in the frigid air. I muttered a quick prayer, as was my habit, asking for God's guidance over our worship team and the service that would soon follow. At the time, it seemed like any other day, but looking back, I realize now how God was setting the stage for a divine intervention that would forever alter my life. As I pulled onto the highway, the roads were slick with a thin, treacherous layer of black ice. My mind wandered to the worship set I had carefully planned for Sunday. Would the new lighting design enhance the atmosphere? Would the congregation respond to the new song I had selected? These thoughts filled my head as the radio softly played a familiar hymn, its melody underscoring my musings. And then it happened. Before we go deeper into the story, I wanted to let you know that later in this video, we'll be giving a special shout out to 2 amazing members of our community. If you'd like to hear your name in a future video, be sure to like this one, subscribe, and comment your name along with the city you're watching from. We'd love to connect with you and make this space feel like home. A semi-truck loomed in the distance, its headlights cutting through the early morning haze. It was moving faster than it should have been, and before I could react, the massive vehicle began to swerve. My heart pounded as the truck jackknifed, its rear trailer swinging wildly into my lane. Time seemed to slow, and in those few seconds, I was gripped by a strange mixture of terror and surrender. The last thing I remember was the deafening crash and the blinding light of impact. When I opened my eyes, I wasn't in my car anymore. At least, not in the way you'd expect. I found myself floating above the mangled wreckage, watching as paramedics worked frantically to save me. The scene was surreal. My body was pinned inside the crumpled frame of my vehicle, while a red-haired paramedic barked orders to her team. I could see everything, hear everything, and yet I felt strangely detached from it all. What struck me most was the overwhelming sense of peace that enveloped me, as if I were being cradled by an unseen presence. A warm, radiant light began to draw me away from the chaos below. It wasn't like the harsh glare of emergency lights. This light pulsed with life, love, and an unexplainable sense of purpose. As I moved closer to it, I felt a presence beside me, a presence that would reveal truths about worship I never could have imagined. The light drew me in, not with force, but with an irresistible invitation. It radiated warmth, love, and a purity I had never known, and every fiber of my being yearned to move closer. As I floated toward it, I became acutely aware of a presence beside me, gentle, yet commanding. At first, I dared not turn my gaze. But then, I felt an overwhelming sense of familiarity, as though I'd known this presence my entire life. Slowly, I turned, and there he was, Jesus. The moment our eyes met, my soul trembled with recognition. His gaze was unlike anything I had ever experienced. It carried both the weight of eternity and the intimacy of a lifelong friend. His eyes were deep, like oceans that held every tear I had ever cried, yet they sparkled with a love so profound that it rendered me completely undone. In his presence, every hidden part of me was exposed, yet I felt no shame, only acceptance, peace, and a love so powerful it brought tears to my spirit. "Sarah," he said, his voice resonating not just in my ears but in every corner of my being. It wasn't loud, but it was unmistakable, as though the very fabric of existence echoed his words. "I have brought you here because there is something you must see." Before I could respond, he extended his hand. The scars on his palms glowed faintly, a reminder of the price he paid for humanity. I hesitated for a moment, overwhelmed by the holiness of the encounter, but then I reached out and took his hand. The moment our hands touched, a rush of light enveloped us, and the scene before me dissolved into something entirely new. We stood in what I can only describe as a celestial observatory. Around us were countless windows, each one displaying scenes from churches across the world. I saw grand cathedrals and small, humble gatherings, ornate sanctuaries and open fields where believers worshipped under the sky. But Jesus wasn't showing me just the physical aspects of these places. He was pulling back the veil, revealing the spiritual realities behind them. "Look closely," he instructed, and with a wave of his hand, one of the windows expanded until it filled the space before us. It displayed a worship service in a large, contemporary church. The production was immaculate, moving lights, flawless vocals, and a congregation swaying in unison. By earthly standards, it was perfect. But as Jesus allowed me to see beyond the surface, I noticed something chilling. Dark shadows weaved through the congregation, lingering near the stage and among the worship team. These shadows weren't static. They moved with purpose, whispering into ears and wrapping themselves around the hearts of those present. I realized, with a pang of sorrow, that these were not ordinary shadows. They were spiritual forces at work, distorting the very worship meant to glorify God. Jesus turned to me, his expression both sorrowful and resolute. "Do you see, Sarah?" he asked. "Worship is a battleground. The enemy cannot stop it, so he seeks to twist it, to shift its focus away from me." As the vision continued to unfold, I could feel the weight of what I was witnessing settle into my spirit. Jesus began to show me more, scenes that would shake me to my core. But what he revealed next would not only open my eyes, but also ignite a mission in me that I could never have anticipated. As the scene before us shifted, I felt the atmosphere grow heavier, charged with both sorrow and urgency. Jesus continued to guide me, his presence unwavering. We stood before another vision, this time of a smaller, intimate church. The congregation was deeply engaged in worship, hands raised, voices lifted. Yet once again, the spiritual realm told a different story. Dark tendrils wrapped around some members of the worship team, feeding off their thoughts. I could hear whispers that I knew they couldn't, subtle lies sown into their spirits. "You're not good enough. They're watching you fail. Make it more about you, they'll notice." These thoughts, though faint, seemed to weigh down the very air, clouding the worship with an invisible but tangible distortion. I turned to Jesus, my voice trembling. "Lord, why does this happen? They love you. They're here to worship you. How can the enemy have such influence?" His gaze was filled with compassion, but there was a sternness in his tone as he replied. "The enemy knows the power of worship, Sarah. He once led the worship of heaven himself. Though he was cast out, he understands its potential to bring my children closer to me. That's why he works tirelessly to corrupt it, even in subtle ways." He paused and gestured toward the worship leader in the vision. "Look closely," he said. The leader, though skillful and passionate, was distracted. His mind oscillated between leading the congregation and thoughts of how he was perceived, his appearance, his voice, the precision of his delivery. "This is one of the enemy's greatest strategies," Jesus continued. "He doesn't need to destroy worship outright. He only needs to shift its focus ever so slightly, away from me and onto human elements. And it begins in the heart." The next moment, we were no longer standing in the celestial observatory. Instead, we were in what appeared to be a spiritual battlefield. On one side, worshippers knelt in prayer, their spirits glowing with radiant light. On the other side, dark figures lurked, whispering, sowing distractions, and feeding off insecurities. It was a war being fought on an unseen level, a war for the heart of worship. Jesus pointed toward a group of worshippers whose light shone brightly, undeterred by the enemy's schemes. "These are those who worship in spirit and in truth," he said. "Their focus is entirely on me, and because of that, the enemy has no foothold. But watch what happens when even a small distraction takes root. I saw one of the figures step forward and whisper into the ear of a worshiper. The light around her dimmed ever so slightly as her thoughts shifted to something mundane, a task she'd forgotten to do, an unresolved conflict. The change was almost imperceptible, but its ripple effect was clear. The worshipper's focus wavered, and the connection to God's presence grew faint. This is why vigilance is crucial, Jesus said. Worship is not just a moment. It's a posture of the heart. It requires intentionality, purity, and unwavering focus on me. The vision continued, each scene more revealing than the last. What I saw was sobering but necessary, a call to action that would become the foundation of everything I would do moving forward. The battlefield faded, and we returned to the celestial observatory. Jesus stood beside me, his expression resolute, as another scene unfolded before us. This time, it was a grand, modern worship service filled with vibrant lights, soaring melodies, and a congregation caught up in the experience. At first glance, it seemed perfect, a well-choreographed symphony of praise. But as I looked closer, Jesus allowed me to see beyond the surface. The worship leader stood at the center of the stage, his voice powerful, his presence commanding. Yet, in the spiritual realm, I could see chains wrapped around his feet, invisible to those around him. These chains, dark and insidious, symbolized pride, insecurity, and the subtle lure of human recognition. I could hear his thoughts, and they pierced my heart. Are they impressed with me? Did that note land perfectly? Will this go viral on social media? Jesus turned to me and said, "This is not worship, Sarah. It's performance cloaked in praise. The heart has shifted, and though my name is sung, it is not truly exalted." Do you see how the enemy twists even the purest of intentions? Before we continue, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge two amazing members of our community. Paul Downs from Lakeland, Florida, and Leonard from Seattle. Thank you for being part of this journey. Your presence here means so much. And for those of you watching, we'd love to hear from you too. Leave a comment with your name and the city you're watching from, and don't forget to give this video a like. Who knows, you might receive a special message in our next video. We're building something beautiful here, and your support makes it possible. As the scene continued, Jesus revealed the spiritual battle playing out in that service. The congregation, though sincere in their worship, was being subtly distracted. I saw individuals scrolling on their phones, others consumed by self-consciousness, and still others singing with their lips, but disconnected in spirit. Yet, even amidst the struggle, there were pockets of light, worshippers whose hearts burned with genuine adoration. Focus on them, Jesus said, pointing to one such group. This is what I seek, worship that is pure, untainted, and fully surrendered. These worshippers, though they are few, create a ripple effect in the spiritual realm. Their light pierces through the darkness and draws others toward me. I watched as their worship became a beacon, illuminating the room and pushing back the shadows. The difference was undeniable. While the production dazzled the eyes, the light of true worship reached the heavens. Jesus then turned to me, his voice carrying both authority and compassion. Sarah, worship is not about perfection. It's not about production or performance. It's about connection, spirit to spirit, heart to heart. Tell my people that I am calling them back to this. As the vision ended, I felt the weight of his words settle deep within me. What I had seen was both sobering and hopeful, a reminder of the power of worship when it is offered in spirit and truth. The scenes faded once more, leaving only the warmth of Jesus' presence beside me. His hand rested gently on my shoulder as I tried to process everything I had witnessed. The weight of what he had shown me was overwhelming, yet his presence filled me with peace and strength. Now, Jesus said, his voice steady and full of purpose, let me show you what true worship looks like. With a wave of his hand, we were transported to a small, humble church nestled in the countryside. The room was plain, with wooden pews and a modest altar. There were no elaborate lights or sound systems, no screens projecting lyrics. And yet, the atmosphere was electric with a tangible sense of God's presence. The worshippers, though few in number, sang with a fervor that seemed to shake the very foundations of heaven. I could see the spiritual realm overlaying the physical space. Angels moved among the congregation, joining in their praises, while a pillar of radiant light ascended from the room, piercing through the heavens. It was breathtaking. "This," Jesus said, gesturing toward the scene, "is what I seek. Worship that comes from pure hearts, untainted by distraction or pride. It's not about the size of the congregation or the quality of the music. It's about the posture of their hearts." Jesus allowed me to see beyond the worshippers into the heavenly realms. There, I witnessed something extraordinary. The worship from that small church was woven into a grand symphony, joining with the praises of countless others from around the world. It was as if the worshippers were adding their voices to a divine choir that filled the heavens with glory. The sight brought tears to my eyes. But then Jesus' expression turned serious. "Now, let me show you what happens when this purity is lost." We were suddenly in another church, much larger, and equipped with all the modern trappings of worship. The music was flawless, and the production was stunning, yet the spiritual atmosphere was starkly different. There was a heaviness in the room, a sense of emptiness despite the beauty of the performance. I could see spiritual shadows weaving through the congregation, sowing seeds of distraction, pride, and apathy. "Do you see the difference, Sarah?" Jesus asked. "It's subtle, but it changes everything. True worship ushers in my presence, but when worship becomes about performance, it creates a barrier instead of a bridge." Jesus then showed me individual worshippers. I could see their hearts as clearly as their physical forms. Some were glowing with genuine adoration, their spirits fully engaged in communion with God. Others, however, were dimmed by distractions, thoughts of their appearance, worries about the week ahead, or even judgment of those around them. One worship leader in particular caught my attention. She was skilled, confident, and outwardly worshiping with passion. But in the spiritual realm, I could see chains of insecurity binding her spirit. "She longs to please me," Jesus said, "but she's burdened by the fear of human judgment. She doesn't realize that my approval is all she needs." As the scenes continued, I began to understand the depth of the battle for worship. Jesus' words resonated in my heart. True worship is not about the sound of the music, but the surrender of the soul. It is an act of the spirit, a connection that transcends the physical. The visions faded, leaving only the radiant presence of Jesus before me. His expression was one of deep compassion mixed with urgency, as though the weight of the message he was about to share was as heavy on his heart as it would soon be on mine. He looked directly into my eyes, and I felt as if he could see every thought, every doubt, every unspoken fear within me. "Sarah," he said gently, "I've shown you these things not to discourage you, but to prepare you. There is a calling upon your life, a mission to restore true worship in my church." I felt a wave of emotions, honor, fear, and inadequacy all at once. "Lord," I whispered, "how can I do this? I'm just one person." "You're not alone," he replied, his voice steady and reassuring. "I will guide you, and I will place others beside you, those who share the same heart for me. But it begins with you, Sarah. Your obedience, your willingness to surrender, will set the foundation for what I will do through you." Jesus began to explain the steps needed to bring worship back to its true purpose. He spoke of prayer as the cornerstone, the kind of prayer that isn't rushed or superficial, but deep, intentional intercession. "Tell my people," he said, "that worship must flow from hearts steeped in prayer. Without prayer, it is like a vessel without water, empty, no matter how ornate it may appear." He then emphasized the importance of studying scripture, explaining how worship must be grounded in the truth of his word. "Songs must reflect my character, my nature, and my promises. When my people sing truth, it shapes their understanding of who I am and strengthens their faith." Jesus continued, addressing the need for humility among worship leaders. "They are not performers, Sarah. They are priests, standing in the gap between heaven and earth. Their role is not to draw attention to themselves, but to guide others into my presence." As he spoke, He showed me a vision of what the future could look like, a church united in pure, authentic worship. I saw worship teams praying together before services, not just rehearsing, but seeking God's guidance. I saw congregations engaged, not as spectators, but as participants, lifting their voices in unison. The atmosphere was charged with God's presence, and miracles unfolded as chains of addiction, fear, and brokenness were shattered. "This is what I desire," Jesus said, his voice filled with longing. "A church that worships me in spirit and truth, where my presence is not an accessory, but the very essence of their gathering." The enormity of the mission settled on me, but so did an overwhelming peace. "Lord," I said, my voice trembling, "I will do whatever you ask. Lead me, and I will follow." Jesus smiled, his eyes radiating approval and love.
"Go, Sarah.
Share what you have seen. Tell my people that I am calling them back to true worship. And remember, I am with you always." As the vision ended, I felt myself being drawn back to my body. The mission Jesus had given me was clear, and though I didn't know exactly how it would unfold, I trusted that he would lead the way. If this story has touched your heart, we'd love for you to join our community by subscribing to the channel and leaving a like. We don't make any money from these videos. We do this because we're passionate about sharing these powerful testimonies and connecting with people like you. Your support helps us continue this mission, and even a simple like or subscription goes a long way. Thank you for being part of this journey. When I opened my eyes, the world around me seemed both familiar and utterly transformed. The beeping of medical monitors and the hurried voices of paramedics faded into the background as I gasped for air, the weight of my journey with Jesus still fresh in my spirit. I was alive, but I was no longer the same. The doctors called it a miracle, surviving a crash that should have claimed my life, and without any lasting injuries. But I knew the true miracle wasn't just my survival. It was the mission I had been given and the profound truths Jesus had revealed to me. As I recovered, I couldn't keep the experience to myself. I gathered my worship team and shared everything I had seen, every word Jesus had spoken. At first, there was silence, a mix of awe and conviction filling the room. Then came prayer, heartfelt and raw, as we committed to restoring worship in our church. Changes began to take shape. We reduced the emphasis on production, focusing instead on creating space for God's presence. Our rehearsals became times of prayer and intercession, where we sought God's guidance for every song, every note. The congregation, too, began to change. As the focus shifted from performance to presence, lives were transformed. People encountered God in ways they never had before. Chains were broken, hearts were healed, and spirits were renewed. Now, I share this testimony not just as my story, but as a call to action. Jesus is inviting all of us to return to the heart of worship, worship that is authentic, spirit-led, and grounded in truth. It's not about perfection, it's about surrender. It's about encountering the living God in a way that transforms not just our services, but our very lives. If this story has inspired you, I invite you to continue your journey with us. The next video we've prepared is going to reveal something incredible, something that could change your perspective on worship and deepen your connection with God. All you need to do is click on the video that's now appearing on your screen. Don't miss this opportunity to take the next step in your spiritual journey. And if this message has blessed you, please give this video a like and leave a comment saying amen. Let's keep this blessing flowing and build a community of faith together. Your engagement helps us reach others with these powerful testimonies, and we're so grateful to have you here with us.